everybody. Welcome to Black Knowledge Matters. And so basically I want to introduce my brother-in-law. His name is Deleon Teasley. He's a native of Richmond, California. He is a master computer builder, technology specialist. He's an herbologist. He's an urban farmer. He's a health enthusiast. He is a self-taught, multi-level, multi-dimensional genius and avid, and I mean avid, did I say avid? An avid rabbit hole follower. So if you're one of those people who finds some information and tries to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, and you kind of get down there and you get a little scared, you know, go back up to the top. Y'all can ask him how deep the rabbit hole goes, because he's going to definitely find the ends, and he's going to let you know to the last millimeter how far that rabbit hole is going to go. So definitely we want to welcome at this time Deleon Teasley. So Deleon, you can take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
You good, but be a little louder.
All right. So okay. So how about this? Is this a little better?
Yes, that's
okay.
Better.
I have to put the mic in my nose, so this will work out. All right, so basically, we're going to do what my goal today is to basically do an examination of racism. And there's a reason for this. A little more a backstory about me. I remember I was like 20 years old, I think, and I took my first class at junior college. And one of the classes I took was African studies. I'm also going to African studies school and that. So I go in there and I think I already know something because my family been talking to me about stuff. I think I'm awake, cool. And then the teacher was Dr. Lacey. And he started giving us some stuff like, yeah, this and the Africans and that, and yeah, there was slavery in other countries. I said, what? What? That entire time I've been alive, I did not know that there was slavery in other countries. And I'm 20 years old. And I recognized that right when it happened. I was embarrassed. I didn't tell anybody in the class, but I looked around like, what? I was walking around in the world making decisions about how things go down, and I didn't know something like that. So after that experience, I kind of dedicated myself to finding out what was really going on. And based on that, I ended up here after all the studying and stuff like that. So in my examination, what I found is when I try to talk to people about particular situations, I always find that we all have different starting points. And the different starting points causes a challenge in the effective communication, which is,
Hey, Del, sorry to interrupt you. You're kind of going in and out.
All right. Give me 1 second. Give me 30 seconds. Let me see if I can do something.
Okay, because I want to make sure that we cannot hear you well and hang on to your every word, because I'm finding it interesting thus far. I got my paper and pen out and all that kind of stuff and is ready to write down some awesome stuff.
So how about those Warriors? No, just
kidding. Is this a little better, Felicia? Can you hear that?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thank you.
No problem. Where was I at? So basically, what I find is whenever we talk about these different forces that exert influence against us, and we're trying to actively communicate to somebody, on how to talk about it, means that you talk about white supremacy, which aspect of it, and nobody really can say. And so everybody kind of just focuses on them being mean to you in your face kind of part, or depriving you of business part, which is relevant. But we never get into, how the underlying philosophy of a Western the philosophy is defined by this stuff. So it doesn't matter which aspect of white supremacy you look at. If it's ingrained with Western philosophy and Western philosophy has everything, and white philosophy and white supremacy has contaminated everything that's in. So in the effort to try to demonstrate that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back in time. I'm gonna start around 1500, and I'm gonna show how several systems of white supremacy have developed. One second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. It says an examination of white supremacy.
Okay. So basically, and I'm going to define white supremacy, so it'll be consistent throughout the conversation. I define white supremacy is that provided a mediating framework or provided a platform that manipulate the lower classes of serfs from one region against lower class serfs from another region. And that fundamentally is simply a component of empire building. So again, white supremacy, as I'm going to define it in this talk, is the state system that provides a mediating framework, meaning that's something that you could build on, that manipulate one class of people, usually lower class people, against people of a lower class from another region. One second here. So I'll bring up my first example. So basically, with that framework, there are multiple frameworks of white supremacy, but I'm gonna show you four, but I'm gonna talk about in detail one. So you have what I call the Kantian, and I'm speaking my screen. Kantianism. Kantianism is a philosophy of Immanuel Kant. He's an old school German philosopher, and this is the guy that fundamentally came up with the several classes of races, like white, white, brown, black, and Indian. They call it American. So Kant is the guy who kind of came up with it, not came up with the system, but he codified the system. And all the other people, he's a German philosopher, and all the other people beneath him, like George Hegel, Fitch, they're all on the side. And they took his philosophy and ended up getting a dialectic. And I'm sure you guys know about that. Dialectic stems from Kantianism. So just as a quick side, when you mentioned before, like the Republicans were like supporting like communism, stuff like that, they all came from the same place. They all go back to Hegelian dialectic. They're the same people. You have left Hegelians and right Hegelians. They all pretend like they're doing something different, but they're not. So, so this is basically this is the Kantian version of white supremacy. This is what the Europeans usually demonstrate on people. Then you have Spanish code, the Spanish Black Code. So the Spanish Black Code is derived from a general European Black Code. But every one of the Black codes went on ahead and did their own little thing. So in Spain, what happened was the Spanish Empire had a lot of land they found, and they didn't have any people. And so it wasn't a big deal for them to just go ahead and make more people by breeding with whoever they could. And to mediate that, they went on ahead and just started to classify everybody. So you got Spaniards at the top, those are just people born in Spain. Creoles, we know what Creoles are, Zitos, Mulattoes, Zambos, Indigenous, and like in all white supremacy structures, the Africans are at the bottom. So it doesn't matter if you're in the Spanish slave code, French slave code, English slave code, you always see a trend. And the trend is Africans are always at the bottom of whatever code they establish. So this is an example of the Spanish slave code. Code Noir. I'm not gonna go too much detail about this, but it's real similar to the Spanish code, but just with a little difference. So the reason I showed you that is I was trying to demonstrate that in the European lands in the colonies, they all had slavery, but they all have different codes. None of them were cool to you. But the thing is, the Barbados slave code was different than the Spanish and French codes. They went extra hardcore for certain reasons. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate to you right now. Or present to you that. So first, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and do a little 3-minute update on what was happening in the world at the time. We're talking around about 1400, around 1490, 14 and 1500. There was a treaty called the Treaty of Tordesillas. And what it is this is a treaty that basically allowed the Pope to just split up the world. The Spanish crown got one side, the Portuguese got the other. And so
the Deleon, let me ask: Is this where the Pope said, Portugal, you take this side, and Spain, you take this? Is that what this is?
Yes. There were two of those. One was the Treaty of Tordesillas. I don't know if I'm saying it right. And one was the Treaty of Zaragoza. I think I just saw.
Okay. I just wanted to.
Yes. That's that. So when they were dividing up the world and splitting it up, this was that incident. So after this incident happened, again, the Pope was cool with both the House of Portugal, and they wanted to both succeed because war was bad for money, and so that's one of the reasons why he went on and made this treaty. And then when they made the treaty and they got all this land, all the Americans and stuff, they realized they needed more people, especially Portugal, because Portugal was small. And so the Pope then came out, and this is just business, came out with the Dumas de Veras. So that was in 1452. The Pope basically came out and said it authorized Alfonso of Portugal, to conquer Saracens. I forgot how to say it. Saracens and pagans, and consign them to perpetual servitude. So this law was basically, the Pope came out and told them, hey, look, if they're a pagan or anybody else we don't like, if you grab them, you can put them into perpetual servitude. So this is how that whole ramp up of the slave trade really got supercharged when it got blessed by the Pope. So that was happening in the world at the time. I wanted to introduce that to show you how this whole machine really got cranking up. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to specifically talk about the English and English law and how that influenced the slave code, or how this was used as a foundation for building the system of white supremacy. The one thing I want to show you is debt binding. These are laws of England and how they go about handling the situation. So in England, you got debt binders, also known as debt slavery, bonded labor, or peonage. It is the pledge of a person's service as security for the repayment of the debt or other obligations where the terms of the repayment are not clearly reasonably stated, and the person who is holding the debt does have some control over the labor. So we're trying to demonstrate that, basically in English law, if they determine that you owe them a debt, this is how they look at it. And they're showing you that the person you owe the debt to, they can arbitrarily decide when you pay it back or not. So you're kind of in the situation. So that's debt binding. Now, why is that important? The Vagabond Act, 1547. Again, the reason I'm going back here is I'm starting back. I'm trying to go back around this time where the foundations of this system started. this is why I'm going back to this part. So the Vagrancy Act was a statute passed in England by King Edward, whatever. It provided that vagabonds could be enslaved for 2 years and continue weekly parish collections for the poor. The enslaved vagabonds would be fed bread and water or small drink and were allowed to be worked by beating, chaining, and other methods the master may choose. So when I'm demonstrating this is the way they treat and this is the attitude they have for their poor people. They call them vagabonds. They're just poor people without jobs. That's all I'm demonstrating that this is the culture that they had and how they felt about poor people before they even started getting into slavery at this time. So this is how they treat their people. And the vagabonds is very important because I'm going to demonstrate that, how that influenced the Barbados slavery. I want to make sure I told you those two acts. One second. Now, so now I'm going to talk about how the particular code I was going to talk about the Barbados. The reason I'm talking about the Barbados slave code is because most of us were probably influenced by the Barbados slave code because we were in or around the 13 colonies. And the slave code that dominated the 13 colonies was the Barbados. It wasn't the Spanish slave code, French slave code, it was the Barbados. So I'm going to go into detail on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the players involved in establishing the code and the situations that were existing at the time. So basically, 1642, you're having the English Civil War. Somebody was upset about something and they started fighting with each other. Because they were fighting, you had people take sides. And one of the person that took sides was a guy named Sir John Colton. Somebody who decided to side with the king. And when the royalists, if I'm the royalist, you got the royalists and the Cavaliers. These are just factions that was going on during the Civil War. So basically, this guy, John Colton, was with the royalists. The royalists lost, and he had to bail out. When he bailed, he ran to Barbados. So basically, King Charles and Colton, and well, actually, what ended up happening was because this guy ended up working with the king. When the king ended up taking back over, he ended up giving this king, he had a lot of favor with the crown. So the crown started giving this guy a lot of leeway. So he gave him a lot of leeway on Barbados, he lived by slaves, he gave him certain trade protections. And also, because it's already up, he ended up granting this guy a charter in Carolina. So this is how the Carolinas were started. King Charles granted Colton and another 7 persons called Lord Proprietors the land called Carolina in honor of his father, King Charles. Colton brought a group of settlers from the Caribbean island of Barbados, who brought with them slaves from Africa and thus introducing slavery to Carolina. These settlers introduced cultivation of rice to the area. The Colton County, South Carolina is named after him as Covington, North Carolina. So what I'm trying to demonstrate to you right there was, one second, please. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, John Colton players who ended up introducing slavery to the Americans. The person who was the key sorry. So basically, Marty Ford came in and he took over Barbados. Not Marty Ford, Colton. Colton came in, he did what he wanted in Barbados, and they're starting to make a lot of money with the sugar plantations. And then the Great Fire of London happened, 1666. So at the time in Barbados, they were getting an influx of Black people and white people. You got the Blacks, from wherever they got it from. And then you have white indentured services. There is, saying people in debtor prisons, whatever like that. So these are all people coming in to Barbados. It was fine for a minute because they didn't have a whole lot of people in Barbados, but then the Great Fire of London happened, and then all the poor people in London got jobs. So because there was actually work going on, because they had to be in London, the influx of work from London and England in general started to dry up. So they had to step up their slave trade to try to compensate for it. Because of that, all of a sudden, instead of having 5,000 or 6,000 slaves on the island, you might have 20,000, 30,000. And they saw that coming, so they had to really clamp on that real hard. Plus the fact that white indentured services started to get a little more influence in the situation, a little more power. They had a little more say-so about it. And they recognized the owners, the landowners, Colton and the guys, they recognized that was gonna be a problem. So when they decided to make the new code, one second. So they basically made the Barbados slave. 1661. Officially titled An Act for the Better Ordering and Governing of Negroes. So this is, it was a law passed in by colonial English. Legislated to provide a legal basis for slavery in the Caribbean islands of Barbados. It is the first comprehensive slave act. And the code's preamble, which stated the law's purpose was to protect slaves as we do other men's goods and chattel. Right. Established that Black slaves would be treated as chattel property in the island's court. Why I like to talk about the Barbados Slave Code, because in my investigations, I find that in the particular aspects of white supremacy we live in and we experience in the 13 colonies, and that's how I describe America, this is the code that we are victims of. Everybody around the world is a victim of white supremacy. Africans that were enslaved in 13 colonies are victims of this particular. It's Barbados, Jamaica, it's, I think, 2 more English-owned islands, and then it's America.
Trinidad and Tobago.
All of those places that were owned by the British or the English, this is the system the English installed. And that system is different than the Spanish system. That's why you'll have different variations in different Caribbean nations, like their music and the way they go about worshiping and stuff like that. It was based on whether they were owned by which codes they were by. I'll have a link for all the references I'm using right now. I don't know where to post it, but I'll have a place for all these websites. So I just brought this up to show you. This is the actual page from the Barbados Code. Just so we're not looking at Wikipedia. one of the things that happened was when they made that code, they made two codes. One was the Barbados Slave Code, an act for the better governing of Negroes, but they made another code at the same time. So in this paper, it demonstrates that Barbados was the first place to create a unique racialized demographic described by law. In 1661, Walron created two comprehensive pieces of legislation: an act for the good governing of servants and ordinating the rights between masters and servants. That's one law. And an act for the bettering, ordering, and governing of Negroes. Those are two distinct laws that they made in Barbados. One act was for servants, we would call white people, and the other act was for Negroes, what they were called black people. So I'm demonstrating that even though these people are slaves, they live by two different codes. White people live by this code. Black people, or the law, should I say, in the eyes of the law. In the eyes of the law. Right. Again, I'll stop on this point real quick to point out that this is one of the main reasons I try to bring up conversations about the origins of white supremacy. People try to bring up the fact that other people were slaves and we were treated like crap too, which might have been the case. The argument is whether you got treated like crap. The argument is that there are different laws for you. And this is what I try to describe. Ever since the beginning, there's been two laws. Law for the white people's servants, and laws for blacks. Now, you can replace white people's servant with any servant. Anybody from any country who's a servant can come here and step into this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what color you are. You can step in and what? You are not seen with the with the Negro, with the law governing Negroes. The laws that you are applied to are the laws talking about servants. I'm sorry. So this is the point where the two laws are made, as far as I'm concerned. And this here is just another page, reference to show the actual source. This is just another reference to demonstrate. We're not just looking at the page. All the references were moving. All right. So now, with that said, fun fact. So what ended up happening was, John Colton had a friend named Thomas Mightyford. Thomas Mightyford ended up becoming the governor of Jamaica. And he ended up serving on a company called the Royal African Adventures. The Royal Adventures of Trading. This company was the biggest slave traders in the world. And these guys were part of it. They're all in it. You probably heard something like called Pirates of the Caribbean and something like that. I'll go ahead and show you. Thomas Mightyford was appointed governor of Jamaica by commission dated 15 February 1664 and made a baronet. He arrived in Jamaica Jamaica 4 June 1664 with 700 planters and their slaves, marking the wholesale introduction of slavery-based plantation in Jamaica. Thomas Mightyford was the guy who introduced slavery into Jamaica, or Barbados. I'm showing you how this thing is creeping around. stuff. Um, on a side note, that brings it back to the Royal African Company, the company that Thomas Mittyford and the other guy worked for. Just so that you know, the Royal African Company, RAC, was an English mercantile trading company set up in 1660. I'm looking at these dates, by the Royal Stuart family and the city of London merchants to trade along the west coast of Africa. It was led by the Duke of York, who was the brother of Charles II and later known as James II. It shipped more African slaves to the Americans than any other company in the history of the Atlantic slave trade. It shipped more African slaves to the Americans than any other company in the history of the Atlantic slave trade. This is why I'm showing you the players. You know their names. You know, Royal African Company, Stuart family. You know who's involved. You know James. All these guys are involved with this. That's the Royal African Company. And if you want to have some fun, you want to see who the Stuart family is? Stuart number one. Can you guys see who that is?
Yes, James II of Scotland.
King James.
Can you make it a little bigger? Just, yeah. Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Everybody knows who King James is. Talk about him all the time. King James was the head steward. His brothers and his family owned the company that sold the most slaves. Fun fact. So basically, I'm going back to Jamaica now. So basically, Thomas Mitford went up and set up the system in Jamaica. And then they went on ahead and they got the contract with the king to set up shop in the Carolinas. So they did the same thing that they did in Jamaica. They loaded up a bunch of people, a lot of planters. They loaded a bunch of slaves on there, and they went to Carolina, and they set up the same system they set up in Jamaica, which is the same system they set up in Barbados. And to that point, this is how the Barbados slave code was introduced to the 13 colonies. Not the English colonies. That's what I'm trying to describe the 13 colonies specifically as in America. So basically, once they got to the Carolinas, they started adopting the slave code to fit the regions they were in, for whatever reason. So this is where one of the things they started doing was castration. At the time in Carolina, what they did was they raised cattle, and they would sell the cattle to people in the colonies, on the islands, stuff like that. And so I guess twice a year they would I forgot what you call it, but they would go get the cattle, they would brand them. I mean, not brand them, but do what they do, and they would castrate some of the males or whatever like that. So because of that culture and tradition, they inserted that into the Carolina slave code, where if a slave got caught escaping twice, he was castrated. That was not in the Jamaican slave code, and it was not in the Barbados slave code, and it wasn't in the English slave code. It just came from somewhere else. what you find is what's happening is as this code spreads to other parts of the country, every state or colony is putting their little twist on it, how they want to just brutalize you even more. Let me see if I can find the exact. Okay. I didn't plan to talk this long, sorry. So basically, after all the colonies adopt the Carolina slave code, we started having a situation. And the situation is white slave owners. Actually, at the time, white people actually didn't exist. They didn't make that up till a little later. They needed a way to distinguish the classes because they made up new classes. Before, a slave was black slave, white slave, you all have the same status. Now that they created different statuses, they need the way to deal with it. So from now on, you'll see them persistently making up brand new stuff to compensate for their make-believe reality. White people are different. So what ended up happening was now what I'm doing is I'm gonna demonstrate how they modified the laws in the colonies and how they codified it and solidified it. 1 second. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down here, and this is the law that was passed in Maryland in the 1640s, actually 1664. And this is basically what they described for Negroes. The law as finally adopted had 4 provisions which may be summarized as follows. 1, all Negroes and other slaves, whether already in the province or to be later imported, were to serve durante vita. I hadn't heard this word before. I looked it up. It basically means for life. For life. 2, all children born of any black or slave were to be slaves as their fathers. Were to be slaves as their fathers. This word established. If your father's a slave, you're a slave. Shut up. Durante vita. 2, they go into some other details about like just how they trying to motivate white people and black people to not interact with each other. But at this point, this is where they codify it. That, this is the law, this is how it is, and it has never changed from here. And they modified it a little bit, whatever like that, but this is the point where you basically were seen as a slave for life. There's no talk of, there's no talk of manumission. There's no talk of trying to figure anything out. No, slave. Why? Because the law says. That was a 1664 law, and basically they kept modifying it until about hardcore till about 1720. At around 1720, they had pretty effectively, completely and utterly suppressed you. They had all the laws, all the practice, all the situations that could and couldn't exist, whatever like that. They covered for all that stuff. And they wrote it in the law and codified it. I'll show you some codes in 1 second. So, durante vita, this is how the law sees you. So basically, all the other colonies basically ended up adopting Maryland and Virginia slave code. So even though you got Georgia, Alabama, Texas, whatever like that, they all just adopted basically Virginia. Yeah. Let me find the law real quick. Here we go. So I don't know if, I'm sorry, let me make this big. Now, you saw that first law was passed in 16, something like that, and now we are gotten to 1715. So that whole gap during that whole time, they've been modifying the law, messing with it, tweaking it, messing with it, tweaking it, messing with it, tweaking it. Now remember, this is 1750. The United States does not exist. These are still colonies. So, you know, we're not, this is one of the reasons why you don't hear me talking about constitutional rights and nothing like that, because we're far off from that. And it's also one of the reasons why I want to start so far back, because when we get to that point, it gets kind of interesting. But basically, to summarize this part, the law that emerged from the 1715 session was the most comprehensive servant and slave law yet enacted in Maryland. There were 26 provisions in it, and the order in which they appear utmost regular in the legislator's mind was not the question of status, but the question of control. The provisions may be summarized as the following. These are like the super codified, let's say super codified. This is what, in my opinion, most white supremacists live by. Like this. So number one, I'll give you some examples there, like 20 of them. Number one, no servant, slave, not specified, was to wander beyond 10 miles from his master's house without a pass signed by his master. Of course. When you're somewhere you're not supposed to be, and people walk up to you, they just randomly ask you questions, and straight up, it's none of their business. Actually, it is their business. I'll show you why. Actually, it's not on this page. Sorry. But basically, later on in another document, what it shows is it was the white person's duty, if they saw something they didn't know, to walk up to the person. If another white person saw you see that and you didn't go stop those black people, the white people who didn't stop them would be fined. And you would fined for something like tobacco, like in this case. Any person who, oh, actually, that's not right. Any person receiving goods in excess of $1,000 from a servant or a slave has restored the full value to the rightful owner and or received 30 lashes. So back in the day, they traded in tobacco. That's how they find you, pounds of tobacco. For example, any person bringing runaways back from the neighboring colonies could receive 400 pounds of tobacco. So this is how they paid you tobacco. All African Americans would be slaves during their natural lives. Again, this is how the law and system demonstrate. I mean, sees you are to be in that status forever. Everybody talking about changing their status. That's cool, but the law does not recognize that. They don't care. They never did. And this is the big one I like. Baptism of blacks would not be grounds for freedom. Why is that the most important law? To me, this is where they committed the biggest sin. But what happened was they violated some rules. And the rules was they violated the rules of manumission. In most cases, especially in the Christian situation, a pagan was somebody who just wasn't a Christian. So if you want to become a Christian, and they're not, we're talking 1400s, we're talking 1300s. That's how they define it. To go from a pagan to a Christian, all you had to do was convert. And you do whatever you do, and now you're a Christian. And because of that, you were then afforded Christian rights, protections under Christian law or whatever like that. But what happened was the black people were trying to become baptized, and they were like, hey, if we baptize black people, then they're going to have Christian rights. So that ain't good. We don't like that. So everybody got nervous. And then I'll do a class on this later, the Quakers, the Anglicans, the Moravians. They had all come over to the 13 colonies trying to convince the colonists to let them baptize black people. And the Protestant colonists were like, no way. And they said, no, 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 look, it's cool, it's cool. We'll make something up. And basically what they made up is work with the legislators of Maryland to basically say, okay, look, blacks, what we'll do is we'll baptize you, but you don't have any rights. That's cool, and everybody agreed. So at that point, actually at the time I don't have that link right now. When they end up splitting up basically Christianity. So you had a class of Christians who were, you had a class of Christians who had Christian rights, and you had a class of Christians who didn't have Christian. The class of Christians who had rights were called white. And the class of Christians who did not have rights were called black. And this is the fundamental means upon which they start to race in America. And not just race, how they feel about you, and what your true potential is, and what rights you actually have and don't have. So once they were able to say, yo, this person doesn't have any Christian protections, then they really went ham on it. Let me see if I can bring up that law. Right here. An act declaring that baptism of slaves does not exempt them from bondage. Original law. So basically, based on the research I've done, looking at what I looked at, understanding, how their actual motivation behind doing what they did, I have an opinion about the situation. This is how I feel about it. Basically, the Europeans ran into some extra land. They needed extra labor. The Pope helped them out, changed the rules to justify it. Once they justified one rule, they kept justifying the rules. When they saw the profits coming in an effort not to mess with it or influence the profits at all, they did straight violations, just violations of the rules. They just violated. And by doing that, the byproduct that left over was a social strata that was defined by law. That strata is those codes, the codes for service and the codes for Negroes. Those two codes created a social strata that is perpetuated throughout all colonies that exist in the Barbados system. And the laws clearly demonstrated and gave instructions on how the people from the different classes were to be treated. Actually, it gave very specific instructions on how white people were to be treated. I keep having to bring this up. Yeah. So this is a good part. So this is one of the reasons why they made the laws. These separate laws for slave servants were a response to the resistance from the labor force. By allowing white servants more privileges, including granting rewards for capturing runaway slaves, the plantocracy of Barbados recruited an army of policemen who watched over the activities of the slaves as vigilantly as their masters. So, that's why, when I talk about, the origin of white supremacy, this is why, we understand that, they made these laws to try to appease their white servants by giving them a little bit of cookies and telling them, hey, I'll pay you if you capture the runaway slaves, become policemen, and I'll break you off a little money. And so now everybody's happy except for the slaves. But, plantation owners don't like the white slaves. The servants, they feel the same way. They think you're awesome. They don't care whether you know the truth or not. Just long keep fighting each other and not paying attention to what they're doing. So, I think, oh man, I went over long. That's it. That's the end of my presentation. I hope it was informative, and I appreciate you listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deleon, so much. I was able to get a lot of notes in there for like one thing that what I was really enjoying is, of course, when you're talking about the different rights and things that they're having, and how they had to as life went along, they had to find the different things that was going on and kind of change actual laws in order for things not to be fair for us. It wasn't just they were just letting things go along and, oh, this is just what happens, but it was a blatant, oh, wait, in Christianity, this is supposed to now be your brother. We're trying to teach these savages about, Christianity. And so therefore all Christians are supposed to be brothers. So this is now supposed to be your brother. They should not be enslaved. But like, okay, wait a minute. Now we gotta flip the script and be able to actually put down laws and say, oh, my bad. You can be a Christian, but you still can't be equal to me. But we still got these laws against you, but you still got to be a slave, So that part really, stood out to me because of the fact, of course, in the past being a Christian myself, but also it's just how everything is coming and being put together. And as times go, it's like, it's a purposeful. It's one thing if stuff just happens, and, a lot of Black people fall into, this particular category, but you could see going down the line how things were purposely put against us. And so for me as a person, I'm like I hate when the young people are always like, oh, you're racist. Oh, this is racist. Oh, this racist, right? And I'm like, racism is a system. And I feel like just saying somebody's white or somebody's Black, I have to always try to educate the young people because I can't stand that. So I don't see any questions necessarily in the comments. Does anybody have any quick questions that they do want to ask? Or any comments?
Tony has put something in to everyone. Number 17 in the laws mentioned. Tony, you want to elaborate on that and unmute yourself? Yes.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
When I was looking at the laws, number 17 said that all African Americans would be slaves for their natural lives. But then the laws also refer to free Blacks. So I'm trying to figure out, was there a difference between African Americans and free Blacks? Because if African Americans are gonna be slaves for their natural lives, then who were the free Blacks?
No, exactly. So that's why, I noticed. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So I noticed that in some of these things, they were putting African Americans in there. And I'm kind of thinking like, I wonder why they did that. Because kind of like I mentioned, that term, it literally did not even exist. Like they only made that up. Like I'm think it was 17 something. I think it was more like 16 or something like that. But to kind of demonstrate that, if they look at any records before that time, any ship logs, any custom logs like that, Black, white, purple, that stuff doesn't show up. It's not on there. Only until they started passing these laws in the early 1700s, then white and Black started coming up. So it becomes a challenge to try to have a traceability matrix to try to trace back, like, what group exactly were you talking about? Because they hadn't defined it yet. And at this point, this one, they're trying to run around and figure out what's going on. Just like why I showed you the Spanish system. The Spanish system didn't have a problem. They didn't sit there and try to divide them. They didn't try to divide everybody into black and white. They just said, okay, we're just gonna look at you white, kind of white, semi-white, light white, light, black, super black. And that's why you got, I don't know, 8 different things in the Spanish code. But in America, or not America, the 13 colonies, it was only 2, white and black. And their problem was trying to figure out how to justify keeping everybody they don't like into the black category. And so nothing they say is consistent. Every time you turn around, they're changing their minds, they're making stuff up, you know what I'm saying? They're defining everything, they're not asking anybody the questions, they're just making it up. And in a lot of situations, I haven't had a chance to, I don't know, if you see my screen? Can anybody still see my screen?
No. I'll go share again.
Oh, sorry. It was just a point in here. But the thing, like I said, the point about that is, even though they're using this language, I think they're using this language right here just to communicate to us who they're talking about. But that's why, you know, I kind of do, you know, the forensic investigation of it, because the truth about it is, I wasn't there, and these people could be lying. So I just try my best to just investigate what I can and see what the consistencies are, and tell people it is. But when it comes to figure this out right here, it's confusing. I mean, what does that mean? What does that mean? You know, like, what are they talking about? They did specifically. I mean, when they talk about the indigenous people, they do bring that up, but they don't talk about color. They just say the indigenous. But at this time, you know, when you actually, let me see if you go down. It turns out in Maryland, they had actually passed a law, I think it's 1730, to actually make a colony in in Africa. They're going to make a brand new colony in Maryland, and they're going to send all the free black people there. But what they didn't want is they didn't want you there. So if you're a black person, you will walk around Maryland, they would say, hey, what's up? Get out. Here's your shit. Leave. But then after Nat Turner situation happened, they changed it all. They was like, you know what? We ain't helping you with nothing. Matter of fact, get out. I'll find the link for you, but basically, they made a law saying that if you're a free black person, you got like 2 days to leave. Unless you get a white person to say that you're a nice, upstanding black person who won't cause no problems. Otherwise, you are kicked out. They kicked out all the free black people. But they didn't like it. Like actually all the countries did, but we can go into detail about it. Sorry, I couldn't find that link.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I have a comment, and I was wondering if I could share my screen. I was just really fascinated with the information that was presented, and because you started off talking about that treaty that I can't remember the name of, that the Pope divided the world, and it made me think, well, why would they do that when, okay, this is Christianity. This is the origin of Christianity. Why would why because on your list, when they were talking about mestizos and these kind of mixed people and that the Africans were always on the bottom, but here in the 2nd century in the catacombs of Domelita, this is the way that they were portraying Christ. And you know, again, in the catacombs of Doma Lita, here's Christ and here's Abraham. And then, you know, well, I put this one in twice, but here in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, this is like one of the oldest pictures of Christ. You know, you have all of, I really like this one, Colin and Jesus or Yeshua, because this one is found in Russia. So even in Russia, they were portraying the progenitors of Christianity as Black people. And here the Pope is playing with a black doll. You know, the Pope is playing with dolls. So, but then the Moors were also there, and they actually created the possibility for Europe to become Europe, you know, for those 700 years. So I guess my question is, do you think that, I think I got one more. Yeah. This is when the Moors were defeated in Germany. That's what this picture represents. I see your hand, Judy, hold on. So I guess my question is, do you think, Deleon, that they put us on the bottom because they retain that history of us being on top? So I see Judy's hand and then Malik. And so Leon, will you answer my question and then go to Judy and then Malik? Okay.
Basically, in the beginning, I had mentioned specifically several forms of white supremacy. And so, the particular form that influenced the situation you're talking about, one second, is the Kantian white supremacy that we talked about, Immanuel Kant. And so, what it is
you know, and I'm glad that you brought Kant into it too, because you know he's known as a giant.
Yeah,
a literary, and I'm glad you pointed out his history, you know, things that he did.
Oh yeah, so see, what happened was, where it gets a little tricky. See, Europe was divided obviously among religious lines. So you have the English and they're Protestants, and Protestants just mean Chester. You know, that stems from, you know, King Henry breaking away from the Catholic Church because he, you know, the Pope wouldn't give him a divorce. So basically, the Catholic Church didn't have a lot of influence over England later on. So that's why the English slave code differed a lot from the French and Spanish slave code, because the French and Spanish slave code had a lot to do with the Pope still. The English slave codes, they had nothing to do with the Pope. And so I bring that up to show that the two different, like, evolutions of white supremacy. And when I talk about the Kantian method, what ends up happening is, in an effort to try to justify enslaving Black people, they started trying to scientifically say it by saying, you know, well, you know, technically, you know, the White people, their brains are this and blah 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 blah. You know, the stuff they just started making up. And this guy's before Darwin. And so Kant and a bunch of other people, something happened in Germany. Let me bring it up real quick. 1 second.
Right. Judy, and will you pose your question? And then I believe Leon is next. I mean, excuse me, Malik is next. Right.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Yes, I didn't really have a question, and I really couldn't hear very well. The audio was going in and out. It may be on my end here in Atlanta. But the only thing that I wanted to comment on, growing up in Alabama, in Tuskegee, and you know, that's of course not as far back as any of this, but I was just thinking that it's not surprising that the way they valued us as individuals all through since the destruction of Black civilization, they just make up anything. They said anything goes. And when you look at how things progress all the way up into the 50s and 60s with the Jim Crow laws, even though they had some laws on the books, most of that stuff, at least in some of the southern states, was not respected or honored anyway. So, they did what they wanted, eyeballing and looking at somebody wrong and, all of that. So it's just, to me, it just goes to show how they always thought so little of us, and there's no real justification for wrong and for being evil. So, they had all kind of reasons to just make up stuff as they go. So, I mean, it's nothing surprising at all. Not to say anybody's surprised, but it's just, why would they have to justify it? I mean, they justified in this country and this ruler and this over here. And, it's just all a bunch of bull.
Exactly.
That was my comment.
Okay.
Brother Malik, and then Minister Ahmadi.
Greetings, family. First of all, Brother Leon, I just want to say what a brilliant presentation. You really put your passion and your expertise into this particular subject matter. And, I really appreciate that. But I just wanted to make some quick comments. I know one thing you were talking about, it made me think about this course I had in college about this documentary on the Great African Pie, where the European powers to be divided up the entire continent of Africa amongst themselves, as if it was a barren wasteland devoid of any people. And the other thing was, you had mentioned about religion. We know because African people are spiritual people that religion would be used as a tool to justify slavery, and God would be used as a co-conspirator to give slavery some justification that it was a high authority that had commanded that people of African descent be relegated to beasts of the field, so to speak. Yeah. But the other comment I wanted to make deals with the term laws. When you use the term laws, I only use it in a pejorative sense, because just the term law itself, it gives credence to the term legal, make it seem like it has to be legal. So it attempts to legitimize and legalize, provide legalese, I should say, to slavery. And even today, you're here when that debate of reparations or the enslavement of our people comes up, you'll hear primarily white people say, but it was the law then. It was the law. And they have to give them some type of cover or appear to be blameless because that was a law of the land. So we always have to be careful, other than citing it as an example, when we say the law or the law. And so I just wanted to, once again, just thank you for this presentation. If you have any comments you could add to what I just shared, would appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I was just looking at somebody, you can't see it on my screen, but can you see the screen right here?
Yes, the title of the book.
Yes, so it's the tyranny of Greece over Germany. A study of the influence exercised by Greek art and poetry over the Greek German writers of the 18th, 19th, 20th. I'm sorry, I'll try to speak up. So the reason I bring this up is basically, and I'll go back, since we all know what's going on. So remember, the German philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, whatever like that, they stole that stuff from the Comedic mystery schools from Io. We know they did that. But the problem is, when they came over to tell the people what's going on, they left out the virtues. You're not supposed to teach the people the knowledge without the virtues. The virtues is what show people how to control the knowledge they're about to get. So they were like, forget all that stuff. They condensed it down to a couple of them, and they gave it out to the people. The people running around here using it incorrectly, so now they have to make up something else called ethics. And that's why I brought up this thing right here, excuse me. Nicomachean ethics. So Nicomachean ethics, so basically Aristotle, there's a guy named I'm sorry, Francis, there's a reason I'm talking about this. Francis Bacon. You know, basically, his work is seen as developing the scientific method. How everybody's talking about scientific method and believing science and all of the crap, trash. That stuff comes from Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon based his reasoning off of Nicomachean ethics. Nicomachean ethics came from the fake mystery schools. So the point I'm bringing this up is these people have the knowledge. They know who made it. And yes, they have to basically downplay Black people because they have put all their statue and all their intelligence and all their we're smarter than you in the Greeks. But if you take 2 steps, you realize the Greeks got this stuff from the Black people in Egypt. And so nowhere on this value chain can you let any of this knowledge out. Because if you get any aspect of this, it always leads back to the same place. So they have to crush everything. So what ended up happening is these guys, Fitch, all those guys, they were heavily influenced by Greek culture, which they completely misinterpreted. In that misinterpretation, they made up a whole bunch of stuff. And the whole bunch of stuff they made up is white people made up everything. Why is this important? Who do you think the people going down to Egypt were? Picking up the stuff, who do you think the archaeologists were? They were the disciples of Kant. University of Heidelberg, University of Berlin, University of Jena. All these guys, they were all Kantian disciples. So when they learned the crap he was talking about, when they went out to the real world, when they found contradictions, they knew to squash that from the get-go. Because what? It directly contradicts the story that we're the greatest. And now they made a story that Black people were stupid and inferior. They can't contradict themselves. They're in it from both angles. You know, you brought up a thing. I'll bring an example of something. I'm going to rant, but everything they got is fake. When they stole us, they stole a philosophy. It didn't work right because they were using it wrong. They tried to make up some religions, trying to compensate for it. Now you have a philosophy, but you have a different religion. How is your philosophy different from your religion? Okay. This is what they bring up. That's a question of them. That's not how we work. That's how they deal with their contradiction. Example, noble lie. We talk about law and stuff like that. I'll bring up philosophy. And so because these people are so infatuated with Greece and pretend like everything they say is the truth, let's go back and see what they say. Noble lie. In politics, the noble lie is a myth or untruth, often but not invariably of a religious nature, knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda. Noble lie. This is a rule in Western philosophy. Kant and those guys that we're talking about, who you brought up about the Black lies, they believe in noble lies. They don't have a problem telling a noble lie. Why? Because it's to advance an agenda. And it's for harmony. What? It's for harmony for white supremacy. Knowing anything that's about Black people is disharmonious to white supremacy. Why? Because it's a direct contradiction to everything they say. So they squash everything. Do we have one thing? Nope. Why? Because white supremacy says you don't have the capacity to think. what Kant came out and said. Black people, and plus the difference between this white supremacy is Kant recognizes you as a human, but the lowest class, with certain capabilities that you simply won't exhibit. So when you bring up going into Africa in the 1800s, King Leopold, what I'm saying, Congo, down the Rift Valley, doing all that nice stuff. He's going there based on the philosophy that Kant gave the reasoning. And then when Darwin jumped in there, Darwin jumped on with Kant, agreeing with him. Darwin, Francis. What's the other guy name? I can't remember. So all this stuff, like the big lie that they made for white supremacy, any introduction of the truth completely and utterly contradicts. Why? Because it demonstrates that Black people have capabilities. You don't have to go too far about whatever. The fact that Black people have demonstrated that they have capabilities above what they said actively destroys white supremacy. It doesn't matter how far below you go. Like another example, we know about this.
We have two questions, one from Minister Amadi and then one from Mama Darnisha. We got only like about 8 minutes left.
All right.
All right, go ahead, Minister Amadi.
Okay, I can do mine really fast. Thank you so much. This is really good information. This last part about the noble lie really clarifies a lot of things. So, what I get from this presentation, it relates to what's going on right now, is that, they really don't want to face the truth.
No.
And so this whole issue about critical race theory is that they don't want their children to know the truth, so they would rather continue a lie. It's just amazing. And, but that's what the whole issue of critical race theory is. They don't want the truth to come out. And then another point is that, while we cannot buy into their narrative, because every time we master the rules, they change them. Because the bottom line for the rules is this: Black people on the bottom and white folks on top. And anytime the situation seems to be changing, well, then they change the rules to maintain the real purpose of the rules, which is for us to be on the bottom and them to be on the top. And so it's just such a game. And so I appreciate this lesson because it just sort of reiterates and reaffirms for us the foolishness of this white narrative, and so that we don't get caught up in it and realize it's just a lot of foolishness. It's like you said, it's a noble lie. So that's all I want to say.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because but one of the major things I want to do was just start introducing to you what the rules are. Like, look, everybody, these are the rules that they are applying. They don't tell us this. They'll straight up look you in your eye and lie. But as far as they're concerned, as long as they're propagating, as long as they're maintaining social harmony, then they don't have a problem with it.
Right.
But the thing is, harmony for who? And so that's the system. That's the thing. All of the lies are made to maintain social harmony for them, but none of their lies create any social harmony for us. For us, it's just a lie. It's just a lie to us. For them, it's noble. For us, it's a lie. And the challenge we have is when we start adapting their noble lies, not understanding that it's not a noble lie, because in the end, it does not give us harmony. That's how you know, if it's a good lie or not.
Right, and there's nothing noble about it. If it's a lie, it's not noble.
See how they bang their way out of it? No, it's okay because it's good. What? No, they just make stuff up. And just real quick about the court case, I brought this case up. It's called Nicaragua versus US. Or the USA. But basically, this is the case. Oops, I'm saying. Nicaragua took the United States the International Court of Justice. It was a case where the International Court of Justice that the U.S. had violated international law by supporting the countries in the rebellion against the Sandinistas by blah, 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 the harbors. The case was decided in favor of Nicaragua and against the United States with the awarding of reparations to Nicaragua. Most people never heard about that. How Nicaragua lost Nicaragua in world court. Well, why is that important? I don't know if I can show you. But basically, the United States came out and said, shut your mouth. If you open your mouth again, I'll defund you. Get out. That's what they said. But the International Court said they told them to shut up. The United States told them to shut up. Like when you talk about laws and stuff like this, they don't laws. They never did. I can show you case after case after case. They just they'll guilty and they'll just refuse. No. I don't care. So I can go into detail about this anytime you want to, but this is the same philosophy they used back in 1800s, 1700s, 1600s. It's the same philosophy. This is white supremacy. The laws are made for the people on top, not the people at the bottom. So I'm just agreeing with you. No lie.
Okay. So, Minister, we have what, 2 minutes left? Did you say there was another person with a question? Minister Imhotep?
I will defer my question, Minister Alicia.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was on mute, Alicia. Let's go over. Darnisha, ask your question. David was one of the very first people on, and I want to make sure that he gets his question. So, Mama Darnisha, and then David, and then Deleon, you can close. All right.
Okay, I'll make it real short.
My question was kind of for you, Minister Imhotep, and you're not going to be able to answer it in 2 minutes, but it has to do with that period from when the popes were worshiping the Black Madonnas, and all of the world knew that pretty much, these big Olmec heads in South America, how the point where we moved from where it seemed like everybody in the world knew that kind of the Black people and the people from the continent were kind of to be worshipped to the place that we are now. Was there something in history that happened? Was there an age? Was there and I know that's probably a big question, which I can defer the answer to another.
So that just the short, quick answer is 710 AD. And 711 AD, the Moors were knocked out of power, and they were so Black people were trampled on pretty much after that. That's the short answer. It has to do with the fall of Moorish rule in Spain, Portugal, and southern France. Brother David.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this amazing presentation. I just want to reiterate a couple things because I just want to make sure I got it right. Okay, there's a pope that we know, the pope brokered the deal with Spain and Portugal to divvy up things. Then it was Charles that was king, right, and had James administering the Royal African Company. Is that correct? Okay, and so James, and this is the very same James that becomes the King James with the Bible version, and then they hook up the Barbados Code, and the Barbados Code gets applied first in North Carolina and then ultimately becomes standardized in Maryland and Virginia and becomes a template for the other states. Is that kind of, am I to understand it like that?
Yes, actually, it went from Barbados to Jamaica, and then from Jamaica to Carolina.
Yeah, Barbados to Jamaica. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And as those guys, planters, migrated to the states, as the conditions became less favorable in the islands and more favorable in the states, huh? Okay. Look, I just got to say this. You know, I'm at an almost all white school teaching right now. And Black History is coming up. And I'm doing a Black History Jeopardy thing. And just because of a couple other things that I've shared informationally with other staff members, the guys asking, like one of the administrators asked to see my questions. You know what I mean? They're scared. It's like the whole thing about, like you said, it's not about harmony. It's about a peace, right? A peace meaning that nothing ruffles my understanding of reality or my comfort zone. So all of a sudden I've be gone from one of the most liked staff members to one of the most feared, just for facts. So it's just an interesting observation.
Facts are scary. Sister Judy, you had your hand up, and then Brother Leon, Deleon, can you close us out?
I appreciate you calling me. I'll be very quick. I just thought to myself as I listened to all of this and the facts, it was a great presentation. Thank you for the information. It just seems the irony of it all is that, first of all, knowledge is power. And we were separated from the knowledge of self, through all of the slavery and everything. But the irony is that even though, these lies continue, so many of us play our community, based on, conditioning and negative conditioning. We play into, accepting many times these beliefs about ourselves as inferior over time. And if we really knew our history and knew who we were as a people and studied ourselves, then we would have be armored with the weapon of power to resist and to demand respect through our economic power, boycotting and other ways to change a lot of these laws. So it's just a lot of irony that, we don't, lies are told about us, but a lot of these images that we see in the movie industry and everywhere, they're creating socially engineering images for our children and people to step into that are negative. So, we have to begin to know who we are and fight against it and stand in our greatness and kill the lie, because it's so obvious that it's a lie.
Right. Well stated. Brother Deleon, would you like to close us out before your subject is so thought-provoking, we could actually go another hour, but we'll have to get you back on and have your mic turned up a little bit better. But great information, well researched. So would you like to close us out?
Sure. Just one more comment. Answer the question about what are one of the mechanisms that the people forgot that Black people were obviously part of the Catholic Church to a certain degree. One of the major things was called the Western Schism. This is when they started having a problem with a bunch of popes. It's a weird thing, but basically there was 3 popes at one time, and then once that happened, when Vatican came back together, they really put the lockdown on a lot of stuff. And when they put the lockdown on a lot of stuff, they started changing a lot of rules. This Western Schism is actually what led to Martin Luther's thesis, this right here. So it starts there, and this right here, the Carolingians. The Carolingians are basically Europeans. You don't want to define what a European is, they're a Carolingian. They all trace their timeline back to Charlemagne. And just to bring up the Moors, the reason why is his grandfather was Charles Martel. Charles Martel is the one who defeated the Moors when they were coming up through France. That's why he's so famous. So it was Charles Martel, and then Charlemagne, and then everybody, blah, blah, blah. So after that happened, a lot of information started getting lost because of those 2 situations. But just make a comment. So basically, so my whole goal of this situation was, I just wanted to try to, give insight into what I found about, the mechanisms and the origins and the philosophy of white supremacy. My goal was just to hopefully give you a tool that you can use to understand, the contradiction that exists. And if I accomplish that, then I'll do it. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, brethren. Yes, that was great. And I want to thank Minister Alicia. Minister Alicia recommended you, and it was excellent. There was something that Mama Darnisha put in the chat regarding Judge Higginbotham, who wrote In the Matter of Color, and he kind of steps the legal system, in the United States, how Africans went from indentured servants to permanent slaves. So she mentions that. You might want to check that out in the chat. All right, next week, what should we talk about? Should we talk about the African origin of Christianity, or should we talk about Black scholars? You let me know. Until next time, we wish you love. I'm sorry, that's another show. Until next time, more time, and love that everyone came out. We had 19 participants, great information, great questions. Hope to see you next time. Take care, live up.